Good morning, everyone. Today, I'm talking about skeletal tuberculosis. The entire discussion and in this one, I'll be talking about skeletal tuberculosis in 1 hour. The entire discussion is all about finding uh, is that making you confident in diagnosing the skeletal tuberculosis patients. Tuberculosis patients in skeletal system. By the end of this talk, you should be able to identify, at least diagnose, if not treat the patients with skeletal tuberculosis. That is the entire aim of this discussion of this topic. Last week I have talked about general aspects of the tuberculosis skeleton, tuberculosis in the skeletal system. I have talked about tuberculosis of the hip joint. This week I will be concluding tuberculosis in skeletal system by talking more about most common form of tuberculosis in the skeletal system, that is spinal tuberculosis. I'll be talking more about spinal tuberculosis, and then if time permits, I will be talking about other forms of tuberculosis in the rare sites, that is osteomyelitis of the tuberculosis, which is rare, which is more all in skeleton. Joint tuberculosis is very common. Of course, spine tuberculosis includes the joint also, but tuberculosis of the skeletal system, spine tuberculosis followed by hip tuberculosis followed by knee joint involvement is common. Other joint involvements is also there, like shoulder joint, ankle joint, wrist joint, elbow joints. Every other joint can be involved by tuberculosis. But I will be talking more about spine. Already talked about hip. If time permits, a few points about knee and shoulder, wrist, and other forms like tubercular Ponson's disease or tubercular rheumatism, and rare forms like osteomyelitis, tubercular osteomyelitis following BCG vaccination. If time permits, I will tell them. Quickly, revision of the previous class. I have talked about incidents, pathology, clinical features, treatment, and then talked about hip tuberculosis. All those things I will not be going through it. I will be directly skipping to spinal tuberculosis, which is the most common form of tuberculosis in skeletal system. Okay, we have come back to spinal tuberculosis. Spine tuberculosis, it can involve cervical spine, or dorsal spine, or the lumbar spine. Any or the sacral region spine is also involved. So, spinal tuberculosis, which region is more common? According to the epidemiological studies, a chart has been given. This even holds good true. Good even at this stage, even though this chart was described in 1960s epidemiological study, this chart holds good. Most common form of tuberculosis is spinal tuberculosis. Most common region in the spine where the tuberculosis is seen is dorsal spine, sometimes dorsolateral spine. The main problem in spinal tuberculosis is, since the spinal cord is within the spinal canal, there is a very high risk of developing neurological deficits by means of compression, or by means of ischemia, or by means of mechanical pressure. There are many mechanisms by which bone involvement causes spinal cord involvement. Since spinal cord ends at L1, so lumbar tuberculosis and dorsal and lumbar spine involvement does not produce any. It can produce neurological deficits, but it does not produce paraplegia. So paraplegia is the most dreaded complication which we have, which we see very paraplegia. That means paraplegia means complete absence of motor power in the lower limbs. Depending upon the site where the dorsal spine is involved, we can suppose it is involving D4. That means from D7 we see some neurological deficit, neurological problems like that. There are specific things which are done, but this table tells us that dorsal spine is the most common involvement for spinal tuberculosis. Next, I would be briefly going about. I'm not talking about etiology here. The etiological factors are tubercular problem, that is Mycobacterium tuberculosis, or it can be bovine type or human type, or atypical mycobacteria are also responsible for skeletal tuberculosis. After tuberculosis of the spine, it is always secondary to some other lesion. It is either the first lesion is in the lung, or in the intestine, or in the abdomen, or in the lymph nodes. These are the primary forms where from them again secondary the bone is involved. Usually the bacteria reaches the spine from abdomen by Batson's venous plexus. This is these Batson's venous plexus are some veins paravertebral, they are adjacent to the vertebra, and they have free communication to abdominal viscera. So that is why most commonly abdominal tuberculosis presents as tuberculosis of the dorsal spine, of the dorsal and also the dorsal lumbar regions. Briefly about pathogenesis. See, in development, the disc, this is the disc. This is the disc. This is the vertebral body. Pedicle. I am showing here. This is the vertebral body, pedicle, and then facets, superior and inferior articular facet, and the spinous process. This spinous process, superior and articular process, and the lamina, all these constitute posterior side, posterior part, and anterior part is a vertebral body and a disc. So usually the blood supply comes to the disc and adjacent vertebral body. So usually disc is initially the primary focus of infection. Once the primary focus of infection sets in, what happens? The disc means it has nucleus pulposus in the center and the surrounding annulus fibrosis, which since the infection is there, the annulus fibrosis gets weakened, and the disc nucleus pulposus might prolapse and can cause impingement of the nerve root, resulting in pain or the neurological deficits. That is one possibility. So disc space narrowing here, disc space has been narrowed here, and the disc is absent. That means it has decayed and got collapsed. Disc collapse, not a vertebral body collapse. Then what happens if still with at this condition patient still has not present to us, it will still progress. What it will progress? The infection, depending upon the virulence of the organism, it spreads to the adjacent vertebral bodies, and from now the bone is also involved. That is what happens. Once the disc is involved, down the vertebral body, above and below is involved. Then what happens? Once the vertebral body is involved, because based on axial compression, the weight of the body goes through the spine, and what happens is the disc, the vertebral body collapses. Disc collapse, what happens is disc collapse narrows the spinal canal. Now at this stage, not only the root is involved, the spinal canal, the spinal cord, if the spinal cord is present in the spinal canal, it also gets involved. Then this might produce paraplegia. At this stage, if it, even at this stage, the natural history, then what happens is, now the spinal cord is involved here. There might be paraplegia or paraparesis at this stage. Now, natural history of the disease is based on the immunity. If what happens is the bone becomes ankylosed. That means it becomes healed by means, first becomes healed by fibrosis. Inflammatory final process is fibrosis. Once the fibrosis sets, calcification on that part develops, and then a ankylosed bone form. That means the joint is gone. The joint, this is a symphysis joint. I mean, yes. So this joint mobility will be option, and then completely ankylosis, bony ankylosis can occur. Or what happens is, if the virulence of the organism is much more, it might form an abscess, and that abscess might track to other places. So this is the natural history of the disease. I have briefly described about the pathogenesis of the tuberculosis of the spine. Presenting again, I will be telling this because this is more important. Initially, and the disc space is involved by infection, then the infection spreads and eats away the disc might get prolapsed and then impinges on the nerve root. At this stage, if we can detect, it is good. If still it is not detected, the next stage what happens is the bone surrounding the disc is involved, and the bone gets infected and gets infiltrated by many inflammatory cells, and bone edema develops. What happens is, once the bone edema is developed, the bone gets weakened because the osteoclasts reabsorb the bone. So then what happens is, the bone gets deformed by means of compressing forces of the spine, and then there will be some deformity of the bone here. The deformed bone might impinge on the spinal cord, might impinge on the spinal cord which is present back. Once the spinal cord is involved here, there might be producing paraplegia. Mechanism by which this collapse produces paraplegia is very much different. It need not be compression. It can be by means of ischemia or by means of other mechanisms, fibrosis cord in engulfing it, or by means of this stretch. There are many mechanisms that by which this collapsed vertebra can produce paraplegia, can produce neurological compression on the spinal cord. But once this deformed bone is there, then there will be definitely neurological compression on the spinal cord. Even at this stage, if we stop, then if it still progress, based on the immunity status of the patient, this might get ankylosed. That means sound calcification might develop and ankylosed, and bone might get fused bone, and or it might track and form a cold abscess and track along the part of least resistance. That is the pathogenesis. That is what is described here. Usually the pathophysiology, usually vertebral body and the disc and the adjacent vertebral body is involved. Progressive destruction, vertebral body collapse, and then deformity. Deformity can be kyphotic deformity, or this angular deformity is kyphotic deformity. Most commonly in tuberculosis, we see angular deformities. The angular deformity which we see is kyphotic deformity. And then kyphosis means forward bending of the spine. And then the spinal canal can be narrowed, resulting in compression by means of different compressive agents. Can be abscess, tubercular debris, or inflammatory edema, or sequestra, or edema picture. Anything can compress the spinal cord. And can produce neurological deficit. Even without compression also, the ischemia, since the inflammatory edema might reduce the blood supply to the spine, spinal cord. In the spine means in the spinal cord, and that can lead to neurological deficits. Then healing and eventually bony ankylosis. This is a brief pathophysiology that you have. That is how spine in spinal tuberculosis is involved. Now, what is our role? Our role is not to make this, is to prevent the progression of the disease to that stage. And the late stage, you can do nothing. Once the paraplegia sets in and the spinal cord is gone, you cannot do anything. You have to live with, the patient has to live with the deformed, with his morbidity. Even the patient might not have mortality, but the patient should live with morbidity, wheelchair bound, and he is dependent on others for his nursing. So our role is to not is to intervene at a stage where the natural history of disease can be arrested. So now the entire discussion and the topic of this lecture is you should be able to diagnose the picture early and you should be able to treat it. That is why this class was asked by me, asked to tell to you. So natural history of the disease, tuberculosis of heals by bony ankylosis or vertebral body destruction, abscess formation or sinus tract formation. If the still it can lead to paraplegia and complication of bedridden. The something which I have told, early diagnosis is crucial. So all thing we have to do is we have to treat early diagnosis and treatment. Now, based on which part of the vertebral body, in most of the times, the disc and the disc and the surrounding vertebral body is usually involved. That doesn't mean there are no other forms of vertebral tuberculosis. No, it need not be only the disc paradiscal type of vertebral tuberculosis. There can be central, that is only the disc. There can be pure vertebral body involvement first without disc involvement. Sometimes only the posterior elements, that is pedicle and the lamina and facet joints can also be involved. That is posterior type of tuberculosis. Sometimes there can be only anterior longitudinal ligament. That could be anterior longitudinal ligament is the ligament that is spans in front of the vertebral bodies. Sometimes that can be involved, or sometimes facet joint can be involved. This is the facet joint. So there are anatomically, based on where the lesion has started, it is described. Vertebral tuberculosis is divided into 5 types. One is paradiscal, for most common form, which is the paradiscal. Second is central or the vertebral form. Third is appendicular or the posterior element involvement. Fourth is anterior longitudinal ligament. Or fifth is facet joint involvement. This is the facet joint involvement. The next picture tells you the same thing in a beautiful diagrammatic way. This is the paradiscal form of involvement of vertebral tuberculosis. This is the central type of involvement of vertebral tuberculosis. Aneurysmal or anterior longitudinal ligament type of involvement in vertebral tuberculosis, and posterior element formation, appendicular or posterior element form involvement, and then some fifth one is facet joint involvement. Facet joint involvement. These are the 5 types of vertebral tuberculosis. The relevant pathology here, I have already told why the vertebral body mostly paradiscal is involved is because the disc, the vertebral body above and the vertebral body below develops from a single sclerotome. So since the blood supply to that and this is same, embryologically this is how it develops. The spinal cord develops. So involvement of paradiscal is more common. That's what described here. Now, cervical spine, dorsal spine, lumbar spine, sacral spine. Any spine can be involved in tuberculosis. Suppose if the cervical spine is involved, if the body immunity is good, there will be healing by bony ankylosis and some deformity of the spine. It heals by some deformity of the spine. If the immunity is not good, then what happens is the tuberculosis infection spreads from that vertebral body to and tracks along the part of least resistance, usually along the blood vessels or along the nerve sheaths or along the ligaments, and present at the space, and it will present at a place away from the site of involvement. Usually in the cervical spine, if it is involved, it can present as retropharyngeal, below abscess behind the pharynx or abscess in the neck. Or sometimes it can track into the axilla through to the brachial plexal sheaths. If the dorsal spine tuberculosis, the paravertebral abscess can be seen. Behind the vertebra. Paravertebral abscess can be seen. If the lumbar spine tuberculosis is involved, the cold abscess can be seen in the lumbar triangle of petit triangle, or in the back, or sometimes in the gluteal region, or along the sciatic nerve. It can be seen in the popliteal fossa. This is what the description is described. So cold abscess, what is it called? Cold abscess is abscess, but it has little signs of inflammation. That means it doesn't mean that signs of inflammation are option. No, cold in the sense does in a abscess by means of non-tubercular organisms. What happens is it will be hot, very red, very hot, and redness and warmth will be very high in other forms of abscess. But in cold abscess, the redness and warmth is not as much as those seen in the pyogenic organism. So that is why this abscess is considered as cold abscess. Usually, why this is that much important is, so a patient presents to you, doesn't present to you with a cervical spine involvement. He doesn't complain about cervical spine involvement. He just complains that I have some swelling in the axilla. You observe the axilla, you feel you see it, and you feel that it is an abscess. So I will drain out the abscess. We simply drain out the abscess by means of giving them an incision and drain it. What happened? The abscess drains out, but it doesn't heal there. That is the medical importance here. What happens is, you feel that it is an abscess that is arising in the axilla. You treat it as an axillary abscess. Once you give a nick, the pus and everything will come out, and the abscess will go. At that within 2 or 3 4 days, you will not see anything, and the abscess completely goes away. But after 4 day 5 day, the nick which you have given will not heal, and there will be a tracking of abscess, tracking of fluid and tracking of debris coming from that IND tract, and then there will be sinus formation which is not healing even with routine antibiotics. That is how this is important. Cold abscess is important. Cold abscess is an abscess where the involvement is somewhere, and the presentation is somewhere. If you do not think in mind about this common presentation, you will be landing up in trouble. Why it is called cold? Because usual signs of inflammation, that is redness and warmth, are less when compared to the peripheral, when compared to the pyogenic abscess. So that is why it is called cold abscess. It presents at a distance side from the where the origin is different and the presentation is different. That is the most important thing here. So this diagram beautifully describes about how the cold abscess can be tracked. The involvement is in the vertebral body. It can tract anteriorly along the anterior longitudinal ligament and present as a paravertebral abscess, or it can tract into the posterior spine and compress the spinal cord, or it can tract along the vessels or the nerve sheaths and present at a distant site away from the origin. So cold abscess. These are this diagram represents how a cold abscess can be tracked or spread. It can spread anteriorly along the anterior longitudinal ligament and form and can present as a paravertebral abscess, or it can track posteriorly into the spinal cord, into the spinal canal, and can compress the spinal cord, or it can track along the nerve roots and can present as a distant site away from the origin. That's what it has been spread. It had been told. The main problem is in dorsal spine, thoracic spine, the spinal canal is very narrow. The lumbar spine canal and the cervical spine canal are somewhat larger. So any involvement in the thoracic spine definitely produces more neurological deficits than the presentation in the lumbar spine or the cervical spine. So thoracic spine, spinal canal is narrow. So these are the diagrammatic representations where you can see this is a patient where it has already been operated, but abscess has tracked because of the virulence of the organism, and then it has present in a lumbar triangle of Petit's triangle, or it can tract into the inguinal ligament, along the inguinal ligament, or it can tract along the lateral aspect of the thigh and forming as an abscess on the lateral aspect of the thigh, or it can tract along the it is abscess tracked along the infraclavicular nerve and then came here. This abscess tracked along the posterior division of the spinal nerve, not the anterior division of the spinal nerve, and has presented as an abscess in the back. So it can track these abscess. You see that it is an abscess. You should not go directly and give a nick and aspirate and drain it. You have to think of something. You find an abscess here. There will be no spinal cord here, but still you should be taking in mind that could it be a tubercular abscess? Could it be a cold abscess? That's how you have to think. These are the more this why this diagrammatic representation is more important. Cold abscess has to be approached with caution, because if you drain it, they result in non-healing sinuses or ulcers. Clinical features I have already described: fever, cold, fever, weight loss, loss of appetite, loss of night sweats. All these why it has occurred I have previously told. Back now, the clinical here the picture is back pain. Patient presents you with back pain. There have to be some telltale signs for you to tell that this back pain is because of spinal involvement. The majority of the people will have, all people will experience back pain, but you should be able to find whether this back pain is an inflammatory back pain or a non-inflammatory or infective back pain, or this is a mechanical back pain. So patient presents with you to back pain which is insidious or gradually progressive. There might be or might not be tenderness over the dorsal spine or the spine or vertebral body involvement, but typical posture is the one that you have to see. There will be stiffness. That stiffness indicates that something is wrong in this patient. Based on that stiffness, your mind should go away. Should go away. The stiffness in the upper cervical region of the is described as a Wryneck position. Lower cervical position is described as a military position. Thoracic, and these are different descriptions which are given to different postures, postural different postures that we see in different involvement of spine. Cervical spine, it is usually called Wryneck and military position. Thoracic spine, Alderman's gait. Lumbar position, it is an exaggerated lumbar lordosis or prominent abdomen. So this is how what described here, but stiffness is the most important symptom that you should not miss. This is very common. It is the earliest symptom. Is stiffness of the back. That based on that you should be able to identify that this is something wrong in his back pain presentation, and then you have to go for other examination findings. You should also look at the neurological involvement, asking to different maneuvers has to be done. But if the patient has clumsiness of walking, or he is feeling heaviness of the lower limbs, that indicates that this patient is going from back pain to paraplegia, which we have to intervene very, very early. So these are the what happens. You can see typical attitude based on the region of the involvement, cold abscess formation, paraplegia development, that you have to clinically first examine, and then other deformities like kyphotic deformity. In the kyphotic deformity, there are other deformities like angular kyphosis, round kyphosis, gibbous deformity, or knuckle deformity. I'll tell you what are those later on, but these are one of the deformities that you have to see. Or paraspinal spasm, that you can stiff muscle. If you palpate that muscle, paraspinal, that will be very stiff, and absent. Sometimes exaggerated lumbar lordosis can be seen. Sometimes absent of lumbar lordosis also can be seen, and movements will be painful. That can be clinically seen. This based on this, these are the clinical features. These are the other features: cervical spine involvement, tracking as an abscess and forming an axillary abscess. The same thing here, in the cervical spine, based on the nerve sheath, it has come down and formed an abscess in the anterior, not in the axilla, in the anterior part of the humerus. This one, and anterior part of the arm. This one in the lumbar triangle of Petit, cold abscess has formed. These are one of the other features, cold abscess. Now, this is what deformity of the spine. If the spine gets deformed, this is how it gets present. It is a kyphotic deformity, angular deformity, which is because the spine has become forwardly bent. And there can also be scoliotic deformity. In this, the spine has been deformed. Spine is deformed here. This is also an angular deformity, but in a different plane. This is an angular deformity in a different plane. So, kyphotic deformity is in the sagittal plane. Scoliotic deformity is in coronal plane. This is how it is there. Okay, so thus deformities will be described in later stages when you go to when the spine is when spine has been will be dealt as a separate topic. At that time, you will be known how to measure this angular deformity, how to measure this kyphotic deformity, how to measure this scoliotic deformity, primary curve, secondary curve. You will be learning. But now at this stage, these are the pictures depicting kyphotic deformities. Look at the kyphotic deformity here. This is also a kyphotic deformity, but this kyphosis is less. So one vertebral body is involved, then it is called a knuckle deformity. This looks like a knuckle deformity, but it's a gibbous deformity. If more than 2 or 3 involved, it's a gibbous deformity. More than 2 to 3 is gibbous deformity. 3 to 4 is round angular kyphosis, and more than 4 it is called round kyphosis. The kyphotic deformity has been described into different parts. This 1 or 2 involved, it is knuckle deform. 1 involved knuckle, 2, 3 gibbous. Mostly you will see these deformities, but these type of deformities are called angular kyphosis. This is a round kyphosis and an angular kyphosis, but these are very rarely seen at nowadays because of the advent of anti-tubercular drugs. Angular kyphosis, round kyphosis, gibbous deformity, knuckle deformity are all are kyphotic deformities, but they are based on number of vertebrae that are involved. Now classify this tuberculosis of. Now I'll come to paraplegia. Paraplegia is classified again into 2 types. At Sedan's classification, why this classification will tell us whether it is an early onset paraplegia or a late onset paraplegia. Early onset means first 2 years. So within the 2 years of the involvement of tubercular spine, if paraplegia occurs, then it is called as then it is early onset paraplegia. Usual mechanism is compression by means of some agent, usually by inflammatory edema, debris, or the sequestra, or by means of mechanically by means of the dislocation of the vertebral body, and inflammatory or ischemia because of the thrombosis that has thrombotic infective thrombus occluding the blood vessel, and ischemia of the spinal cord. This is early onset paraplegia. Sedan's classification tells us that is early onset or it is a late onset. In the late onset, it is because by means of the late onset, the causes of the paraplegia, that means the tuberculosis spine has been detected now, but after 2 years it develops paraplegia. That is a very bad complication, and it's called late onset paraplegia. In this late onset paraplegia, it is because because of the kyphotic deformities or the angular deformities that the spinal cord gets stretched. The spinal cord gets stretched on that angular deformity. So that causes recurrence of the paraplegia because of the bowing effect on the anterior wall of the spinal canal, or sometimes the healing takes place by means of septa. Those septa causes constriction of the spinal cord. And the third form by means because the disease might have again reoccurred. This is how the late onset cause of paraplegia occurs. The thing that you have to remember in this case is, based on this, why the Sedan classification is important is, a patient presents to you with a tuberculosis spine, and you treat it with a tuberculosis spine. You should follow the patient for 18 to 12 months and then look at the deformity of the spine after 18 months. If the spine is more deformed, there will be some mathematical calculation, the deformity of the spine, and if your spine is more deformed, then you have to think that the patient might develop a paraplegia at a later stage, or you should intervene at this. That means you should intervene by means of surgery or by some other things at this stage. That is how Sedan's classification will help you. So paraplegia might even occur even after completely the patient has been healed of tubercular infection. Even because of the stretching of the cord can occur. That is what called Sedan's classification is all about. But clinically, you cannot. This classification will not help you clinically much. But this classification will help you etiologically. Etiologically, you can know what it is. Sedan's classification. Then comes the Kumar's. This is what happens. Early onset paraplegia usually has a good prognosis because it is because of the compression agents. Once the of acute inflammation. So once the acute inflammation has he's tackled care by means of ATT or anti-inflammatory medications, then the paraplegia might recover. But in a late onset paraplegia, it is because of the already fibrous bands, or by means of the deformed spine, or by means of reactivation of the healed spine tuberculosis. That is very difficult to treat even with ATT. It is late onset paraplegia is difficult and treat and has a very bad prognosis. Early onset paraplegia has a good prognosis. That is what I have described here. So early means less than 2 years of less than 2 years. Late means more than 2 years. Now, I will clinically most useful classification is Kumar's classification. Here, not the cauda equina. Cauda equina is a very dead emergency. That means you have to operate immediately. Cauda equina syndrome is a dead emergency. You have to operate immediately. Apart from that, neurological deficit by progressive compression, Kumar has classified it into 4 types based on the motor weakness. It is first one is negligible amount of paraplegia. Number 2, mild, moderate, and severe varieties. What are these varieties? Clinically, when a patient comes to you walking to the walking, and his complaints of back pain, you have to check his neurologically. When you check him neurologically, you found that he is having exaggerated deep tendon reflexes, both in either in the upper limb or in the lower limb. You have found exaggerated deep tendon reflexes, then you have to tell that you have some problem. And patient is not aware of this. He says, "What doctor? He says that if you tell that he is you have some neurological deficit, please try to be cautious." If you tell, patient will not accept it. That's how this is way. But you have to tell him, you have to counsel him. Here, the neurological deficit is there, but only in exaggerated deep tendon reflexes. And one thing is ankle clonus, deep tendon reflexes, ankle clonus, and plantar and knee and patellar clonus are seen usually in along here. So that is examination findings. These examination we examine and tell that it is you are having a paraplegia or paraparesis. In mild form, patient is aware of the deficit. That is, when he comes walking, he comes with a stick, or he comes with somehow he comes with a walking with the help of a stick, or he catches the chairs and comes and sits to you. Patient is aware of the weakness, but he manages to walk with support. This is also called as paraparesis, not paraplegia, because patient is able to walk or able to stand. If the patient is able to stand, then it's called paraparesis. Grade 1 and grade 2 are paraparesis. Grade 3 and grade 4 are paraplegia. In grade 3 and grade 4, patient is non-ambulatory. He cannot walk. He is unable to sit because of the pain. And now at this stage, patient comes to you and you examine, and he's having the classical signs. So here, even in negligible in one also Babinski will be upgoing. Here also Babinski will be upgoing. Corticospinal tract has been involved here, and it is called paralysis in extension. That is, most of the times extensor corticospinal tract is involved here. So that is why you see this posterior part of the column. Corticospinal tract posterior part is the anterior part. So posterior part of the spinal column is still not involved. So sensory deficit will be less. In severe form, the spinal cord is called as a paraplegia inflection or flaccid paralysis. The sensory deficit will be more than 50. Here, bowel and bladder also can be involved. There will be associated flexor spasms. Here, apart from the corticospinal tract, even the extrapyramidal tract and the posterior column tracts also gets involved here. So severe forms of tuberculosis paraplegia. This classification is a very good classification because you can clinically describe which part he is in. Grade 1 and grade 2, that means paraparesis stage. You detect, you give ATT, he can again become near normal. Grade 3 and grade 4, in grade 3, even there is sensory deficit in there. If you give him ATT along with some surgery, he might recover. In severe form, you can patient will become. It is a late stage, so patient will become wheelchair bound and difficulty in giving him a near normal life. That is what this is applicable. Not this classification is applicable. Kumar's classification is not applicable to cardiac venous syndrome. Investigations I will not go through it because I have already described in previous classes. Now X-ray. Radiologically, what you see in first thing, the patient patient presented to you with back pain, and you thought that it is some stage and posture is you have seen it, and you found that some difference in the posture, and you have examined him and his neurological deficits might be there or might not be there, and you're thinking that patient might be having some problem, or you are thinking that patient might be having some inflammatory problem. You have ordered the radiograph. What should you see in the radiograph? You should see the disc space narrowing. You should see vertebral end plate destruction, or there is any wedging or collapse of the vertebra, or there is any lytic lesions surrounded by sclerosis. Sometimes I have told posterior part of tuberculosis or appendicular type of tuberculosis, posterior elements can be destructed, but anterior elements might not be destructed. Or sometimes aneurysmal sign can also be seen, that destruction of vertebral body anterior parts. All these findings has to be seen in the radiological features. I am showing those features. Look at this tuberculosis spine. This you cannot say this is a tuberculosis spine, but you can see that there is a destruction and collapse of the vertebral bodies and angular kyphosis here, and kyphosis both involving two vertebrae, so gibbous deformity here. So there is a kyphotic deformity. This is clinical picture, and this is the radiograph picture. In a radiograph, there is a vertebral body. All the 5 signs I have told. First is disc space loss. Second is vertebral body collapse. Third is vertebral body collapse, wedging of the vertebral body, lytic lesion followed by sclerosis. Upon these things, and in aneurysmal sign and posterior element involvement also has to be seen. Here we can see a cold abscess tracking here, and vertebral body involved here. This is an MRI picture, not a radiograph picture, but still this looks like an aneurysm, and whole of the prevertebral abscess is seen here, and vertebral body is also involved here. Even though we can see a involvement of the L1 vertebra here, but it has tracked below in form of prevertebral abscess. Other thing which you have to see in radiographs is, look at the cold abscess here. Look, it is an fusiform swelling. This is the fusiform swelling of cold abscess. If the fusiform swelling is there, it means that the length is more and the width is less. So this fusiform swelling in the radiograph indicates that it is a cold abscess. You should not miss such findings. And here also we can see a cold abscess here. This is tense abscess. This tense abscess will definitely present with paraplegia if you do not intervene here, because the fluid is in very much tension, and then it might cause the neurological deficits. So cold abscess can be fusiform swelling in a radiograph, or it can be a globular swelling or a tense swelling. This is globular and this is fusiform. Length is more, width is less. Width is more, length is less. This is tense abscess. Or it can present as a prevertebral abscess. Retropharyngeal abscess is seen here. That's what I have seen. And now this is, I will show you reduced disc space. Look, this is the reduced disc space. This is the normal disc space. This is the reduced disc space. And vertebral end plate destruction also can be seen here. Vertebral end plate destruction also can be seen here. MRI shows better. Disc space is gone here, and vertebral end plate destruction is there. Role of CT scan and MRI, I have already told. CT is only to identify difficult areas. That is craniovertebral junction, or the dorsal lumbar junction, or the this one cervico-dorsal junction, or sometimes sacral tuberculosis and sacroiliac joint tuberculosis can be. You want to see those findings, then you have to go for CT scan. MRI scan is the gold standard right now because it detects not only the lesions in early bone edema can be seen, or it can involve it can detect the spinal cord involvement. It can detect even even the lumbar spine is involved. There are chances that at the same time cervical spine and the thoracic spine also might be involved. That is called skip lesions. Skip lesions can be detected well in MRI. And then principles of management, you should go for main early diagnosis is the main thing. If you detect it early, even with chemotherapy, with modern chemotherapy, it will be very good. The regimen might be different, but with modern anti-tubercular therapy, you can, if you diagnose it early, you can give him a near normal life. Surgical, if you go for surgery, it should be very much big surgery. Radical surgical approach is aggressively has to be done. And final thing is you have to prevent deformity. How most patients can be managed with ATT. Surgery is only to establish the diagnosis or to prevent the complications or to prevent spinal deformity and instability. Okay, this is how treatment goes on. There is a regimen. What we do, middle part regimen is what we follow, and radical surgery, middle part regimen, conservative treatment with chemotherapy, or middle part regimen, or radical surgery. Chemotherapy, initially what we give is anti-tubercular drugs, the 5 first line drugs, and the next second line drugs I have previously told: isoniazid, rifampicin, etambutol, pyrazinamide, and streptomycin. These are the 5 drugs which are anti-tubercular first line drugs. There are different regimens. Middle part regimen is usually followed in spinal tuberculosis. It is a non-operative, initially non-operative with tuberculosis, rest, and spinal braces. Spinal braces, there are different types of spinal braces. Taylor's brace we give usually, or there are different spinal braces, spinal hyperextension braces, different braces. But what we give is initially ask the patient to take rest for 3 months, complete bed rest for 3 months, followed by anti-tubercular treatment for different protocols, and then you give nutritional high rich diet. You give some hematinics, that means iron vitamin B complex, hematinics, iron and folic acid supplements to increase the anemia, to reduce the anemia of chronic disease or nutritional deficiency anemia, and we provide some nutritional support. This is how we go initially. Drugs, what we do is in middle part regimen. This regimen might change, or some surgeons might not follow it, but this is usually the middle part regimen. HRE, isoniazid, rifampicin, etambutol for 4 months, followed by H and Z for 4 months, followed by H and R for 4 months, and INH for last 4 months. 16 months protocol. Skeletal tuberculosis treatment is not 6 months. It is minimum 9 to 18 months. The long duration of treatment, prolonged duration of illness. This is the problem with skeletal tuberculosis. Treatment protocol might change. This protocol might not be there, but the treatment protocol is long duration and for longer duration. That's what I will tell. For cold abscess, what you do? Cold abscess, it is always wise not to drain the cold abscess. If they are very superficial, like the described, which I have described there, there is you can leave it. Yeah, EATT will cure cold abscess very neatly. EATT, anti-tubercular treatment, if the patient is given, you need not drain the cold abscess. But if the cold abscess is causing some problems, then we can drain the cold abscess, and after, if they superficially when they are located, you can drain the cold abscess and instill streptomycin powder into the or isoniazid powder. Streptomycin comes in a powder. You can instill that streptomycin powder into that abscess. That is how abscess drainage. You need not drain cold abscesses. They go away with ATT. That is the rule. Drainage of abscess is indicated when the wet ATT. Also, the radiograph shows, serial radiograph shows that size is increasing, or the abscess is causing some problems, which means that they're causing some neurological deficits, or the abscess is causing some nerve impairments. Then we go for drainage. But majority of the times, the abscess drainage is not needed, and sometimes we drain the abscess by means to establish the diagnosis. We drain the abscess, but Most of the times abscess need not be drained. Superficial abscess can be drained, and streptomycin powder can be instilled into it. Sinuses also, they usually heal very well with tuberculosis treatment. They need not be excised. But there are indications where there is we cut and we excise the sinus tract, but majority of the sinus tracts heal and majority of the abscesses heal with ATT. This is what I told. In middle part regimen, rest ATT followed by hematinics and multivitamin tablets, high protein diet, and every 3 to 6 month interval radiographs and ESR. And after 3 to 6 months, after 3 months of complete bed rest, once the pain comes down, and we will gradually mobilize him with help of spinal braces. What surgery? If you want to go for surgery, what surgeries are usually done in part spine? These are the different surgeries that are described: costotransversectomy, anterolateral decompression, or laminectomy. But mostly we will do anterolateral or radical debridement and fusion. These surgeries, different complications, but anterolateral decompression, and if the posterior spine is involved, laminectomy would be sufficient. If the anterior spine is involved, then most of the time the anterior spine is involved, so anterolateral decompression is done. How we do? We cut the, usually thoracic spine is decompressed. We cut the rib, we cut the posterior part of the rib, transverse process, and then pedicles, and then part of the vertebral body, and then we drain the abscess. Usually this is what anterolateral decompression is done. This procedure effectively decompresses all the solid and also liquid debris. But sometimes we not only do anterolateral decompression, we keep instrumentation. We keep some pedicle screws and long instruments to stabilize the spine from preventing the collapse. This is usually done in a late stage to prevent in late onset paraplegia. Deformity has to be tackled, but deformity tackling, we have to keep some reduce the angular kyphosis initially will be very high. So for that we go for surgery to prevent the deformities. So but the problem, you keep an implant, what happens? The infection might persist along the implant, or there might be reactivation of tuberculosis. But still there are cases where we go for instrumentation in spinal tuberculosis. I do not want to go about the controversies, but we do instrumentation in tuberculosis of the spine. Anterolateral decompression is the most commonly done surgery for decompressing the debris of the spine, and then this is what surgeries are all about. Indications for instrumentation: correcting of kyphosis, long segmental disease, or panvertebral disease, or spine at risk signs. These are all when we intervene with spine surgeries. But this is not required for you. You have to know how to diagnose the patient, how well ATT is to be given, initial protocols. That's what will help you. Now, after completing tuberculosis of the spine, I'll be talking a few points about tubercular osteomyelitis, tubercular rheumatism, and shoulder tuberculosis in under 5 minutes, and we will stop the discussion. So tubercular osteomyelitis. See, tubercular osteomyelitis is very difficult to diagnose. This picture is not part of tubercular osteomyelitis. These two pictures are of tubercular dactylitis, are also called as spina ventosa. These pictures are for this. But I am talking about tubercular osteomyelitis. Tubercular osteomyelitis is a very thing which is this tubercular osteomyelitis has to be osteomyelitis without joint involvement, only pure bone involvement. This is very rare, and if it is involved, then we have to differentiate it from chronic osteomyelitis of the bone. How do you differentiate? Chronic osteomyelitis will be discussed later on by some other colleagues, by my colleagues. But how do you differentiate chronic osteomyelitis from tubercular osteomyelitis? Tubercular osteomyelitis long duration. And this forms the tubercular osteomyelitis forms the sinus. Those sinuses will have undermined and or it can form ulcer. The sinuses and ulcers or will have undermined edges. Ulcer will have undermined edges and the sinus will have bluish discoloration at the tip, and there will be spouting granulation tissue at the tip of the the spouting granulation tissue at the tip of the sinus. And then if an abscess is there, the abscess is cold, that is there will be no warmth. Based on these features, we will usually think about tubercular osteomyelitis, differentiating clinically from chronic osteomyelitis. But radiograph, X-ray wise, what and sometimes the sequestra that will be coming out from the tubercular osteomyelitis, they will be like sand-like or coke-like sequestra. But here in what is tubercular osteomyelitis usually involves the long bones, but it can involve any bone, but usually long tubular bones is involved, and it is usually epiphysis and metaphyseal involvement. Diaphyseal involvement is very rare in tubercular osteomyelitis. Now, how do you in the radiograph wise, periosteal reaction will be absent, and then the lysis will be more, and the sclerosis, surrounding sclerosis will be less, periosteal reaction will be less, and the soft tissue swelling will be less. This is how tubercular osteomyelitis is well differentiated from chronic osteomyelitis of the bone. And then in tubercular dactylitis, this is also called as spina ventosa. It is entirely different. Tubercular osteomyelitis, what I told in the radiograph picture, there will be more lysis, less sclerosis, no periosteal reaction. The opposite thing will be seen in tubercular dactylitis. Look at the radiograph picture. There is lytic lesion, less, and the sclerosis is more, and the periosteal reaction can be seen, and the soft tissue swelling is seen. All these pictures are, this tubercular dactylitis is very rare. That it is very rare, even though it is called spina ventosa, because the here lysis is more. Tubercular osteomyelitis, lysis is less. Tubercular osteomyelitis, lysis is more. Sclerosis is seen here. Sclerosis is less in tubercular osteomyelitis. Periosteal reaction is seen here, but in tubercular osteomyelitis, no periosteal reaction. Soft tissue swelling is seen here. Soft tissue swelling is absent in tubercular osteomyelitis. Soft tissue swelling is less in tubercular osteomyelitis. All these features are spina ventosa and tubercular osteomyelitis completely opposite types. But this small bone involved, phalanx of the bone is involved. Tubercular osteomyelitis usually doesn't involve short bones, it involves the long tubular bones. That's how we differentiate. I'll tell about BCG osteomyelitis. In BCG osteomyelitis, this is a complication of BCG vaccination, and it's a live vaccine. BCG vaccine doesn't mean that everyone should get osteomyelitis, but BCG osteomyelitis, one after 5 months, after few months to a few years of giving BCG vaccine, the child might develop osteomyelitis, usually of the long tubular bones. This is also of the long tubular bones. Now, how do you tell it's a BCG osteomyelitis? This you histopathologically, when you is one, you differentiate it. Histopathologically, there will be definitely tubercle. We don't know whether the tubercle is because of BCG vaccine. So you have to culture it. In culture, the organism that has been grown is the same organism that has been used for the BCG strain. The strain of the BCG, that if it is cultured, then you will confirm that it's a BCG osteomyelitis. Fortunately, BCG osteomyelitis is gives good results with anti-tubercular therapy, and it is not, even though it is pathogenic, if you guinea pig test, if you isolate that to BCG strain and inject in guinea pig, there will be no tubercle. That is how negative. A guinea pig inoculation test will be negative. These are one features which BCG osteomyelitis doesn't have. So the same thing, the tubercular osteomyelitis, like it involves the long bones, but diagnosis is by culture of the same strain of BCG that has been given for the vaccination. Tubercular rheumatism. This picture is one where tubercular rheumatism, usually single joint involvement will be seen in tuberculosis. So there are presentations where tuberculosis can present as polyarthritis. Usually polyarthritis is featured of rheumatic fever and rheumatoid arthritis. With in tubercular rheumatism, it presents as a polyarthritis, and there will be good response to anti-tubercular therapy, and rheumatic factor will be negative in tubercular rheumatism. This is a difficult diagnosis. Tubercular rheumatism is a difficult diagnosis, but it has a favorable therapy with anti-tubercular treatment. With that, I will be concluding the tuberculosis. I have talked about spinal tuberculosis and their forms of tuberculosis with you. Any doubts, you can talk to me. You can message, you can mail to the you can mail. That's what I'll tell. Okay. Since there is another 5 minutes, I'll be talking about this was two features about tubercular shoulder. Tuberculosis shoulder, I have previously told, it's a very rare, less involvement than knee joint involvement. But here there will be dry type of tuberculosis is also called as Kari-Sika. Here the abscess form, we don't find abscess here. We find dry form of tuberculosis. This is also same features. This also has good treatment with good response with ATT. Surgeries are rarely indicated when tuberculosis of the shoulder. Knee joint tuberculosis, only one thing I want to say, in knee joint tuberculosis, there will be fibrous ankylosis, and the deformity is called triple deformity. This is called triple deformity, where there will be posterior subluxation of the tibia, and then there will be flexion, posterior subluxation of the tibia, there will be external rotation of the tibia and valgus knee. So this triple deformity is a deformity which is seen in late stages of tuberculosis. At this stage, you cannot provide same thing and the same thing. The same principles holds true for any form of tuberculosis. Early diagnosis and early treatment is the key. If the patient presents to you at this stage with a discharging sinus and ulcer formation and this deformity, you cannot give him a good knee. You have to fuse the knee. That's another option. Or you cannot give a good functional outcome for this patient. Early diagnosis is always important. Triple deformity is a late complication where these are the deformities which we see: posterior subluxation of the tibia, valgus knee, external rotated knee, and then flexion of the knee. Now, this doesn't mean this flexion, this triple deformity needs not be seen only in tuberculosis. It can be seen even in iliotibial band. Why this deformity occurs? This deformity occurs mainly because of the flexion occurs because of the hamstring muscle contraction. External rotation and valgus knee occurs because of the iliotibial band contracture, and posterior subluxation also because of the hamstring hamstring spasm. Triple deformity can be seen in polio. It can be seen even in hemorrhagic coagulation disturbances. That means hemophilia disorders also can be seen, or it can be seen in iliotibial band contracture. It can be seen even in rheumatoid arthritis knee. So triple deformity is not only specific for tuberculosis. It can be seen in rheumatoid arthritis. It can be seen. Triple will give you T means tuberculosis, R is rheumatoid arthritis, iliotibial band contracture, polio, low clotting defects. That means that is hemophilias. It can be seen. The components are this. Treatment is difficult. If it is because of the tuberculosis, ATT will help, and fusion of the knee. That's the only option that is provided. You cannot provide a mobile knee here. You have to fuse. Arthrodesis is the outcome usually. You can give a other knee also, but it is difficult. In tuberculosis, you cannot give you cannot do knee replacement in a tuberculosis that easily, but it can be done. So triple knee is very difficult to treat. The options we have is mainly fusion of the knee, that is arthrodesis or arthroplasty. Arthroplastic is knee arthroplasty, but in a tuberculosis knee, if you give arthroplasty, TKR, total knee replacement, what happens is it gets infected. That is the problem with triple deformity. With this, I will be concluding the class.